The hangar smelled of steel, sweat, and machine oil, the kind of scent that clung to the walls of high-tier military facilities where reputations were built and broken under fluorescent lights. More than 280 SEALs stood scattered across the training mats, their murmurs echoing under the exposed beams as they waited for the next demonstration. It was supposed to be a simple afternoon of controlled technique drills, nothing competitive, nothing dramatic, just the kind of procedural training that kept everyone sharp between real operations. Jokes moved through the crowd like drifting smoke, relaxed, confident, and entirely unprepared for anything unexpected. And then she stepped through the doorway. The small figure barely drew attention at first, 5 foot something, lean but not imposing, a loose black PT shirt tucked into dark training pants. Her posture was balanced without looking intentional, her chin slightly lowered, hair tied so tightly it didn't move when she walked. A few SEALs noticed her and laughed under their breath. Others exchanged smirks. She didn't meet their eyes, she simply scanned the floor, the exits, the shadows, the spacing between groups of watching operators. Her breathing was so calm it was almost unnatural for a newcomer walking into the most elite combat unit on the planet. Someone whispered, loud enough to travel across the mats, "This the civilian cross-train they brought in? You've got to be kidding." Another replied, "Brother, she's lighter than my rock. This'll be good." None of them knew she'd passed 3 phases of classified evaluation. None of them knew she'd outperformed simulations specifically designed to break seasoned operators. To them, she was a curiosity, an anomaly, and, worst of all, an easy target. Master Chief Dalton's heavy boots struck the mat with each step he took toward the center circle. He was built like a wall, arms thick, shoulders squared, eyes hard from decades of deployments. Behind him stood Petty Officer Ruiz, all grin and swagger, rolling his neck as if warming up for a show. Dalton addressed the assembly with the flat authority of someone who expected obedience without question. Basic balance disruption drill. She'll demonstrate. We'll counter, lightly. Laughter rippled through the group. Ruiz added, "Promise we won't break her." Scout's honor. She didn't react. She didn't flinch. She simply stepped onto the mat. The hangar shifted in subtle ways, conversations quieted, phones lifted to record, and a handful of operators leaned closer as if sensing the faint tremor that precedes something unforgettable. Her weight settled into the floor gently, like she was sinking through the mat instead of standing on top of it. Hands relaxed. Shoulders loose. Eyes not focused directly on either man but on the space between them, measuring angles, timing, shadows, and breathing patterns. Dalton thought she looked nervous. Ruiz thought she looked fragile. Both were catastrophically wrong. Dalton gave a curt nod, "Begin." Ruiz didn't wait for the standard first movement. He stepped forward with casual arrogance, then snapped a sudden spin heel kick straight at her midsection, far harder than any light demonstration called for. The strike landed with a deep, echoing thud, enough force to fold most people in half. She dropped to one knee, palm braced on the mat. Gasps flickered through the spectators, followed by smug murmurs and a few stifled laughs. Ruiz grinned, lifting his hands as if he had just performed a magic trick. Dalton shook his head in disappointment, already considering the demonstration over. But she wasn't hurt. Not truly. She had taken the impact intentionally, absorbing force the way she had been trained. Her breath left her body in a single controlled exhale, not a gasp. Her expression didn't contort, didn't even tighten. She simply processed the sensation, cataloged the velocity, and filed away the decision she now had to make. Someone in the back whispered, "She's gonna walk out." That had to knock the wind out of her. But then she rose. Slowly. Deliberately. Her shoulders straightened, her spine aligned, her posture shifted into something colder, sharper, more centered. She wasn't angry. She wasn't emotional. She was resolved. Ruiz's grin faltered the moment her eyes lifted, not wide, not threatening, just steady. Measuring. He took a step back without meaning to. Dalton noticed the shift, his instincts pricking with the faintest warning, but his ego overrode it. He folded his arms. "Continue," she said. The single word traveled through the hangar like a blade drawn from its sheath, quiet, clean, final. The room fell into a strange silence, the kind that precedes violence or revelation. She reset her stance. Feet planted. Hips loose. Breathing level. Dalton frowned, as if suddenly unsure of how the next few seconds were going to unfold. Ruiz tried to brush off his momentary hesitation with a shrug and stepped forward again, preparing another flashy kick. But something had changed, though no one yet understood what. She had given them a chance to correct themselves. They hadn't taken it. The hangar's air thickened with a tension no one could name. Something big was coming, something irreversible, something none of them had imagined when they first saw her walk through the door. And though every SEAL in the room was trained to read threat posture, trained to sense incoming danger before it arrived, not one of them, not Dalton, not Ruiz, not any of the 282 watching, recognized they were already standing inside the blast radius of a decision she had already made. The moment stretched, thin and sharp. She inhaled once. And everything that followed would be remembered in absolute silence for years. The second Ruiz shifted his weight for another kick, something in the hangar changed, subtle, invisible, but powerful enough that several SEALs instinctively straightened as if their bodies sensed a threat their minds hadn't processed yet. Ruiz exhaled sharply, swinging his leg up with practiced showmanship, confident that the crowd expected him to finish the humiliation he had started. But she was already moving, not fast in the way athletes were fast, but fast in the way predators moved when the gap between action and consequence didn't exist. She slipped off the attack line by the width of a breath, pivoting with a fluidity that looked unreal to anyone watching. Ruiz didn't realize he had already lost control. His hip rolled too far forward, his center of gravity drifted, and she stepped into the vacuum he created like she had rehearsed that exact mistake thousands of times. Before his kick even reached full extension, her foot struck downward against his knee with a perfectly angled stomp meant to collapse the joint without scattering energy. The sound, sharp, final, cut through the hangar with brutal clarity. Ruiz's scream tore out of him as he crashed sideways, leg bending in a direction no limb should. Phones dropped. Conversations died midword. The entire hangar froze around the moment like time had thickened into something dense and suffocating. Dalton reacted instantly, driven by instinct and command authority rather than thought. His boots thundered against the mat as he lunged toward her, fury clouding judgment, years of training overridden by the shock of watching one of his own drop to the ground in agony. But she didn't turn to face him. She didn't brace. She didn't even acknowledge the incoming charge. She simply pivoted, low and tight, letting his momentum commit him to a path he wouldn't be able to break. She slid inside his reach just as he tried to regain balance, her heel snapping upward into his ankle with surgical force. The crack of bone was louder than Ruiz's. Dalton roared, collapsing forward, catching himself on his palms while his foot twisted under him in a shape that made even hardened operators flinch. From the moment Ruiz attacked to the moment Dalton hit the ground, only 7 seconds had passed. Most SEALs in the room didn't process it until their minds replayed the sequence on delay, first the pivot, then the stomp, then the second break, then her movement settling again into stillness. She stepped back a single pace, centered her weight, and lowered her hands without urgency, as if she had simply completed a routine drill rather than incapacitated 2 elite instructors in front of nearly 300 witnesses. Her breathing hadn't changed. Her expression remained unreadable. There was no adrenaline flush, no tremor, no hint of satisfaction or regret. She stood there calmly while Ruiz writhed and Dalton bit down on the pain, trying and failing to rise. The silence in the hangar was suffocating. One SEAL whispered, barely audible, "What the hell did we just see?" Another muttered, "She's not even sweating." A third said nothing at all, jaw clenched, eyes wide with the unsettling realization that they had all underestimated someone who moved with the efficiency of a weapon built rather than trained. An instructor on the far side finally broke the paralysis, shouting for corpsmen. 2 medics sprinted forward, sliding across the mat toward Ruiz first, then Dalton. The girl didn't move. She watched the medics with a detached stillness that made the commanding officers uneasy. 3 senior instructors rushed toward her, barking orders for her to stand down even though she was already motionless. Her hands were open, palms forward, empty, expression steady and entirely controlled. When the closest instructor yelled, "What the hell do you think you're doing?" she answered with the same quiet tone she used earlier, soft, factual, unshaken. "They initiated force." The words hit the room harder than the kicks had. Dalton grunted in pain on the ground, unable to push himself upright, his ankle already swelling beneath him. Ruiz was pale, clutching at a leg that no longer obeyed him. The medics worked frantically, checking for compound fractures, stabilizing joints, administering pain management. The girl remained still, observing in silence, as if her mind was already moving ahead to the consequences she knew would follow. The SEALs who had mocked her minutes earlier were now watching with a different kind of focus, trying to reconcile what they'd seen with their understanding of hand-to-hand combat. No one had moved to interfere. No one had stepped in time. Every man there had frozen, watching her dismantle 2 trained operators before they fully understood what she was doing. One of the senior chiefs stepped closer to her with deliberate caution, as if approaching a live explosive. His voice was lower, steadier than the others. "Did you intend to break them?" She held his gaze, unblinking. "No. I intended to stop them." It wasn't arrogance. It wasn't defiance. It was a clinical truth stated without emotion. The chief swallowed hard, unable to find a response. 2 officers arrived with a megaphone, ordering everyone to hold position. No one was allowed to leave. The base's emergency procedures snapped into place on instinct. Hangar doors rattled shut. Corridors were secured. The training floor became a containment zone filled with stunned silence and tension so heavy it felt physical. Someone near the back whispered, "This is going to go all the way up the chain." Another replied, "She didn't attack." She countered, "That's going to matter." She didn't respond to any of it. She simply stood there, shoulders relaxed, breathing steady, waiting as if she had already accepted whatever judgment was coming. There was no triumph in her posture, no guilt either. Only the certainty of someone who had been here before, misjudged, provoked, and punished for responding too effectively. A pair of officers approached her finally and asked her to come with them. She nodded once and stepped off the mat, the path opening around her as nearly 300 of the world's toughest operators instinctively moved aside. Not one man met her eyes. Not one spoke. She walked out under an atmosphere so heavy it felt like the air itself had weight. Behind her, medics loaded Ruiz onto a stretcher and stabilized Dalton's leg. The sharp scent of antiseptic replaced the metallic tang of adrenaline. And for the first time that afternoon, every SEAL in the hangar understood that whatever she was, whatever she had been trained to do, they had just witnessed a truth none of them would ever forget: she hadn't lost control. She had executed restraint. And that was the part that scared them most. The hangar's automatic doors sealed behind her with a mechanical thud that echoed down the corridor, trapping the tension of the entire unit on the other side. The officers escorting her didn't touch her, didn't guide her, just walked beside her with stiff shoulders and tight jaws, as if proximity alone might trigger another sudden collapse of the world they thought they understood. She matched their pace, calm and unhurried, her footsteps silent against the polished concrete. She didn't ask where she was being taken. She already knew. Any serious incident on a Navy training ground, especially one involving 2 instructors, went straight to command review. And in cases like this, no matter what the footage showed, the outsider was always the first to sit under the brightest lights. They led her into a briefing room so quiet she could hear the soft hum of the air system above the ceiling tiles. A long metal table cut the room in half, its surface covered in tablets, printed reports, and still frames pulled from the training floor's cameras. 4 officers sat behind it: the base commander, a JAG lawyer, the training director, and a behavioral specialist. Their expressions varied, stern, curious, calculating, but all held the same tightness around the eyes. The commander spoke first. "Sit." She did. Hands rested lightly on her legs, posture neutral, gaze steady. The JAG officer tapped a tablet. We've reviewed the footage from all angles. Ruiz initiates contact with an unauthorized strike. Dalton escalates. You respond. Efficiently. There was a pause as the screens flickered, showing slow-motion cuts of the moments she wished they would simply stop replaying. Ruiz's overextended hip. Her pivot. Dalton's lunge. The ankle break. None of it brought her pride. None of it brought regret. The training director leaned in. Can you explain why you moved the way you did? She inhaled once, slow and measured. Ruiz aimed a high-impact strike at my abdomen. If I retreated, he would continue. Controlling his knee removed the threat without causing spinal damage. Dalton charged with forward momentum. Stepping aside reduced injury risk to both of us. His ankle failed because he committed too much weight. The room fell still as her explanation settled. There was no arrogance in her tone, no defensiveness, just the plain clarity of someone telling the truth without ornament. The behavioral specialist narrowed his eyes. Your heart rate didn't spike. Your breathing stayed even. That level of composure isn't normal. She didn't blink. It's trained. By whom? She held his gaze. That information is compartmentalized. The commander's jaw worked as he considered her answer. He had seen classified evaluations before, people shaped by programs most operators never heard of. But he had never seen results like this from someone so young, so small, so unconcerned with the intimidation pressed against her. We're trying to understand your intent, he said finally. Both instructors sustained serious injuries. Her voice remained quiet. Intent determines escalation. I didn't escalate. The JAG officer tapped through slow-motion footage again, freezing on the exact moment she stepped off Ruiz's attack line. You could have killed him with that angle. Easily. Yes. But you didn't. No. Another silence. Heavy. Loaded. The training director cleared his throat. Did you feel threatened? A simple question. A complicated answer. She stared down at her hands for a moment, fingers relaxed but still. Not threatened, she said quietly. Responsible. The behavioral specialist raised an eyebrow. Responsible for what? She exhaled slowly. Someone once depended on me. I hesitated. They didn't survive. The room chilled. Her voice didn't shake, her expression didn't crack, but the weight behind the confession changed everything. The commander leaned forward slightly, tone softer than before. Is that why you reacted so fast? Yes. Why you didn't hold back? I did hold back. The statement landed like a hammer. The JAG officer ran a hand over his jaw, absorbing the implications. The panel exchanged wordless glances. Eventually the commander let out a breath that sounded halfway between frustration and respect. Our review indicates you acted with proportionate force. Ruiz violated procedure. Dalton ignored safety. You responded. Cleanly. Too cleanly, if I'm being honest. He closed the tablet. There will be no misconduct charge. She nodded once, acknowledging the verdict without relief. The training director continued, your evaluation with us isn't terminated. But it may need to be reframed. The behavioral specialist studied her like she was a puzzle with missing pieces. Your reactions aren't those of a typical candidate. I recommend further psychological assessment and consideration for tactical instruction support. The commander finally stood, signaling the end of the inquiry. You may return to the floor. The men are still gathered. She rose without hesitation. As the door opened, the conversation in the room fell behind her like a shadow she wasn't willing to examine yet. The hallway felt colder now, quieter. Her steps were the only sound until the hangar came back into sight, its massive doors now open but its occupants unmoving. Nearly 300 SEALs stood waiting. Not talking. Not joking. Not sneering. Waiting. The moment she crossed the threshold, every head turned toward her. The silence was different now, heavy with something new, something hesitant, something bordering on respect. She walked across the mats with the same steady pace she had used entering hours ago. This time, no one muttered. No one smirked. No one underestimated her. One operator near the front cleared his throat, voice low, careful, as if he didn't want to provoke anything unintentionally. "Ma'am, that was the cleanest defensive sequence I've ever seen." Another added from behind him, "And you didn't show off. You could have done worse." A third said quietly, "You kept us safe from them, in a way. They lost control. You didn't." She paused, just briefly, acknowledging their words with a slight dip of her chin. The commander stepped forward, addressing the unit with a voice that carried through the hangar with renewed authority. "Effective immediately, the previous drill is suspended. A new demonstration will be conducted." He turned to her. "If you're willing, we'd like you to show the proper technique." She didn't hesitate. She stepped onto the same mat where she had been struck, humiliated, mocked. But now the silence wasn't cruel. It was reverent. She faced the crowd, inhaled once, and spoke with quiet precision. "The lesson is simple. Control the moment before it controls you." And as she began to demonstrate, not to overpower, not to intimidate, but to teach, every SEAL in the room leaned forward, listening with the kind of focus reserved only for those who had earned respect the hard way. She moved not as a victim or a prodigy, but as someone shaped by loss who had learned to break only what she had to. And in that reclaimed space, she taught them all what discipline truly looked like.